Well, good morning and welcome back to our second session of our second day of Outlook Spartanburg. Again, I am John Kimber with One Spartanburg Inc. and glad you could join us for this very special session that we have in store for you today. Happy to be joined today by Dr. Chris Lombardozzi from Spartanburg Regional Healthcare System and Mr. Ronnie Andrews. We all know that the effects of COVID-19 have had on us this past year. And today we want to talk about a little bit about our 2020, but more or less, what does 2021 gonna look like when it comes to COVID-19? So Dr. Lombardozzi will touch on that and give you a quick state of the pandemic from the hospital's perspective, and then look forward in the new year at what this may look like. I can tell you that, first of all, certainly appreciate all the work that Dr. Lombardozzi and his team do at our local hospital system. He has been right there with us as we talk about bringing back the Burg business recovery efforts to make sure that we're doing it, most importantly, the safe way. And so certainly appreciate his leadership and the whole team at the Spartanburg Regional Healthcare System during this time. There's not a hospital system that I could imagine going through this other than them. So Dr. Lombardozzi, thank you for joining us for this time today. I know you are extremely busy, and so your time is very valuable. And so I will stop and I will introduce you to our audience. Dr. Lombardozzi is the Vice President and System Chief Medical Officer that's on the front line during this pandemic. And I will turn it over to you for your comments.
John, thank you very much. We'll go ahead and get started here. If anyone is watching the news, and I can't imagine that you're not at this point, you're well aware that the national pandemic has continued to worsen, particularly around the holiday season. And we are no different here in Spartanburg. There have been over 13.5 million positive cases now in the United States and over 270,000 deaths. Locally, we have tested over 2.7 million people in South Carolina. There have been about 200,000 plus cases with closing in on 12,000 hospitalizations and 4,300 plus deaths. So this is a very real problem. If you look at this slide, you're going to see the DHEC projections. And unfortunately, they continue to rise and have really spiked in the last couple of weeks. So you're looking at what we see are positive cases, then followed usually by about 10 days to 2 weeks, hospitalizations, and then about 3 to 4 weeks later by spikes in deaths. As a healthcare system, we've gotten a lot better at treating patients with corona, so that's the good news. There have been less deaths per number of hospitalizations than we've had before, but it's still quite awful. In terms of the healthcare system, we are no different from most that you're hearing about in terms of the pressure that's been putting on us. We've had to cancel, defer, or delay elective surgeries for many of our patients. This causes consequences. It's not just someone who wanted to have, a simple plastic surgery and you could delay that for, months or even a year or so with no undue consequences. There are consequences when we delay things like surgeries. We try to get the ones done that have to be done. So if you have cancer or you have a broken bone, those cases get done. But we've had to delay other things, and that does put some stress on folks. In addition, our healthcare system, again, like all others, our employees are really, really stressed. This has been very difficult to deal with. So if you happen to run into a nurse or doctor or someone else who works for healthcare, as I've asked before, just say thank you. That's all we're asking for. We'll do our jobs, but if you can offer a little bit of thanks to those folks, it goes a long way. Here are some of the statistics. You'll see that spike on the right side of your screen there. That's hospitalized patients. That's our daily census. And if you look back all the way to the beginning of the slide, that was the peak back in July. So you've had these little spikes around holidays, but nothing quite like this before. So it is truly a huge problem, and not just for us, but all of South Carolina and, quite frankly, most of the country at this point. There are still no defined cures for COVID. We have a variety of treatments that we've been using for many months with varied ability to help people. So, this is still a disease that, while it mostly affects older folks, mostly affects people with significant medical problems, unfortunately, it can and still does affect young people. And we've had people in their 30s and 40s who have died from COVID. So it does affect a younger population, just not as much as an older population. I do appreciate the support we've gotten from our testing. We are now doing over 1,200 tests per day at our drive-thrus. I believe yesterday we did over 500 at our Pelham site. So clearly giving that access to the community has been very important. You can get easy drive-through testing, and I think for the most part, it's been very well received, and we've been very expedient in how we're doing it. Most people are able to get through in, I would say, less than half an hour, although there have been a few times where the wait time has gone up to 1 or 2 hours, predominantly the days before Thanksgiving. But I think that's gone really well. You can expect to get a result back in about 24 to 36 hours on most days. The important number that we look at is the positivity rate. And on the screen, you'll see it's 18%. In the last few days, unfortunately, that number has risen, and we've been seeing positivity rates in the low 20s. And again, what we do is we use that number as a bit of a barometer for what we're going to see a few weeks down the road. And with positivity rates in the 20% range, we know that we're going to continue to have more hospitalizations and then eventually more deaths. So it really is a big deal. We really want people to stick to the important things. Keep those masks on, wash your hands, and stay as far apart as you can from other folks. What does the future look like? Well, we're into the cold and flu season, and I will say that at least for now, flu seems to be at an all-time low, and that's good news. That may be because of all the measures we're taking. It may be because people are wearing masks and distancing, and that would be fantastic. I'm very hopeful that the flu season will continue to be minimal. That would certainly help us on the healthcare side, in addition to having less sick people. We will continue to see, and unfortunately, this is probably going to get worse before it gets better. We're going to see significant disruptions to schools and businesses over the next few months. The hospital system's well prepared, and I've said before, we're fortunate in that with our 5 hospitals, we are able to shift services, shift staff. We're able to get the things done that need to get done by using all the resources that we have. It would be a lot more difficult if we were a single site and didn't have any resources that we could share. But we're in a good place. It's not without its obstacles for sure, but we'll get through it. You're going to have a real nice presentation in a little bit from a true expert, but I want to talk about vaccinations from the perspective of a healthcare provider. Everyone is aware now that both Pfizer and Moderna have applied for an emergency use authorization from the FDA. I think almost everyone expects that those will be approved within the next couple of weeks. Upon approval, our understanding is that the military, along with the CDC, will begin to distribute vaccine across the country. At this point, we still do not know exactly which vaccine, nor do we know how much vaccine. So we don't know supply, nor do we know which one we'd be receiving. We're prepared for either one, so we don't have to worry about that. We'll be fine. But we don't have the answers to those questions yet. We expect we'll probably hear more about that sometime late next week. There are some significant logistical challenges, particularly with the Pfizer vaccine, in that that has to be maintained in super cold storage. And by super cold, I mean 70 degrees below 0 Celsius. That is really cold. Now, again, the good news is we have the capability to perform super cold storage prior to administering vaccines. So again, we're fine, but it is a logistical issue. Most people, again, are aware by now that either vaccine will require 2 doses. If it's the Pfizer vaccine, it will require 1 dose, say today, and another 3 weeks from now. If it's the Moderna vaccine, it's separated by 4 weeks. So we do have to bring people back. We do need to make sure that they get the vaccine from the same manufacturer that they received the first vaccine from. And we do need to make sure they get those second vaccines within that appropriate time frame. So these are all measures that we're taking to get ahead of that. The CDC has announced that they have a program for this that will help with both marketing and information, as well as tracking things like side effects and sending text messaging and reminding people to come back for their second dose. So we're hopeful that this is a coordinated effort both on a national level and at a local level. In the local side, we work with DHEC to make sure that we're getting vaccine out to everyone. The phases have been announced in a general sense, and what will happen is that when we start to receive vaccine, they will go predominantly to healthcare workers first, so those of us who are on the front line. Then they will go to healthcare workers and predominantly nursing home residents, and at the same time going to critical federal infrastructure workers. Those lists are determined by the federal government, not by us. Depending on the amount of supply, that will determine how quickly we can start vaccinating the public and other folks. So again, we don't have the answers for that. We should expect to see some answers next week. The basics: wash your hands, wear your masks, and watch your distance. Those will remain important into 2021. Regardless of when we get the vaccine, it's going to take many, many months to get the entire community vaccinated. So until that happens and until enough people have been vaccinated to develop immunity for the population as a whole, we're going to need to continue the same preventative measures. So please don't think that just because a vaccine is coming in the next few weeks or the next month or so, that we can stop and let our guard down. We really can't. We need to continue to do all of these things that we've been doing for the last many, many months. If you haven't already, please get a flu shot. That would be perhaps one less thing for all of us to have to worry about. When the vaccine becomes available and it's available for you, I would strongly encourage you to get it, and then I would strongly encourage you to encourage somebody else to get it. My personal feeling on this is that clearly whatever we're doing right now as a nation is not working. We have a pandemic that is completely out of control, and we have a way out, and the way out is a vaccination. It's incredibly effective. Both the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines have published results of 95+% effectiveness, and in terms of safety, I couldn't have hoped for better results. Both of the vaccines are showing the usual side effects that you would see from vaccines. So things like soreness at the site where it's injected, maybe a little bit of swelling or redness, a fever for perhaps 24 hours or so. But there have been no serious adverse events. So that's really, really important when you're talking about something new. You want to be able to reassure people that it's both safe and effective. And I, for one, am very, very enthusiastic about this. It is safe, it is effective. If I'm given the opportunity to get it first, I will be first in line. And I can tell you that our healthcare system, our physicians in particular, I can't tell you how many of them have called me and said, hey, can you put me first in line? So I think that gives you some indication of how strongly we feel about getting the vaccine. And on that, I will end, and feel free to take any questions that you may have.
Right. Well, thank you, Dr. Lombardozzi, for your presentation, but more importantly, thank you for the work that you're doing on behalf of citizens of Spartanburg and the upstate. There are a couple of questions that I've gotten from the viewers, and we'll ask those now. First of all, in the vaccine, you may not know the answer to this question yet because of it may not be decided yet. So how will, assuming the vaccine is effective and we're on the February-March timeline for the general public, how will they know that it's time for their vaccine? Is that something that the primary care will do? Is that something, how is that going to be communicated to the public on the vaccine timeline?
Right. So my understanding of this, and it hasn't been finalized yet, but based on some communication with the CDC that they provided yesterday, my understanding is that they have a software program that will do a multiple number of things. For starters, it will act as a log. So when you come in to get your vaccine, you'll certainly get the standard information plugged in. It will provide a place to call if you have side effects or questions. And then it will also act as a reminder system and a follow-up system to capture people and say, hey, your 3 weeks is coming up. We need you to come back to this particular site and get your second dose. If those people don't respond or don't show up, then my understanding is, and again, I haven't seen this program, so I don't know for sure exactly how it's going to work, but based on what we understand right now, it will enable us to make sure that folks are coming in, and if they're not, to then track them and do follow-ups on that. And I would add that we're working with communities. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today to work with you folks. As the vaccine supply becomes more readily available, we want to make sure that it gets out to everyone and get to every single community that we have in Spartanburg, Union, Cherokee, wherever, and make sure that everybody has an opportunity to get it. So there will be a concerted effort on the part of DHEC, on the part of our business community, on the part of our faith community to make sure that we get access to these vaccines for everyone who's out there.
And there'll be no charge, correct?
That's correct. It is free. The federal government has promised there are zero charges for this. So, cost is not an issue whatsoever.
Another question that I received was about the staff, and we've seen in the news that there's been some staffing issues or lack of staffing or mental health of staff. Is the staff? How are they? How's it? Do you have enough or what?
So we're okay for now, right? This is the nightmare of any physician or any system administrator, which is that you wake up one morning and the pandemic has gotten so out of control that you can't find places for patients, that you don't have enough nurses and doctors to do the job. And you're hearing that from places like Iowa, from Midwestern hospitals. We don't want that to be the case here. We're okay for now. But when I say okay, that doesn't mean good. It means okay. It means we can manage it. And as I said before, we're somewhat fortunate in that we've got 5 hospitals, so we can share resources, we can share beds, ventilators, staff, things like that. That's not the case at a lot of either smaller hospitals or systems that are spread out by greater distance. So we have that unique capability that many don't. But to say that I'm not concerned, that would be a far stretch. I am very concerned.
So the message, again, is wear a mask, wash your hands, keep your distance until there's widespread vaccinations.
Yeah. And look, we've just come through Thanksgiving. We've got Christmas coming up. And I know how difficult it is for families not to gather together over the holidays. I am not, just like I said before Thanksgiving, I'm not telling people what to do. What I am saying is, please make smart judgments based on the risk of your family based on, the type of activities that you engage in, the number of people that you come into contact with, and, whenever and wherever possible, limit contact, certainly with large numbers or with people that you're not in contact with on a regular basis.
One final question from the viewers and that's about therapeutics. I think you mentioned in your presentation that the hospital is part of some of those trials and experiments. So they are using those, and then they're somewhat effective. There's no proven cure, but the Eli Lilly antibodies and plasma, are those all part of the tools now?
Yeah, so the Eli Lilly monoclonal antibodies are only for mild symptomatic patients who are not in a hospital and do not have respiratory symptoms. So there are a very small number of people who would qualify for that, and the efficacy for that one, quite frankly, is a little bit iffy. You'd have to treat a whole lot of people to get some benefit. On the inpatient side, where clearly we are seeing sicker and sicker patients, one of the things, or several of the things that we've done, one, the healthcare community as a whole has learned that putting people on ventilators early was not a good thing to do. And so we try to avoid ventilators as much as possible or until it's absolutely necessary. And that has helped a lot. In addition, we do use things like steroids. We use convalescent plasma. We have used remdesivir. And so we do all those things. Sometimes it's beneficial, sometimes not. A lot of it has to do with the timing. So if we get to people early, we have a better chance of getting them through it. If they come in later or they're sicker when they come to the hospital, then their outcome tends to be a little bit worse.
Well, I think also we talk about, if you watch this on the national news, if you watch TV or read the paper, you see the national stories, and I think you're telling us today that Spartanburg is right there with them. We're not immune to this. We're not special. We are right there with what you see on the national news across the country.
That is absolutely correct.
Good. All right. Well, Dr. Lombardozzi, thank you for joining us. And I know you got a lot on your plate, and we certainly appreciate you taking time to discuss that. And we'll be in touch as we go through the holiday season, and we'll be an advocate for you. If there's any message that we need to put out, we'll be glad to do our part to make that happen.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Right. So Dr. Lombardozzi mentioned the vaccines and the vaccines process that we're having over the next few months. We're going to shift now to a deeper dive into discussion on vaccine and testing. We have a gentleman that is joining us live from sunny California, I believe. Ronnie Andrews is the CEO of Oncocyte. I hope I said that right. Yeah. Mr. Andrews is actually a Watford grad, and he's actually serves on the Watford Board of Directors today. So you are very familiar with Spartanburg, Mr. Andrews. We try to get everybody at this event in person. So you are somebody that obviously knows about Spartanburg and has been here. So we certainly appreciate your willingness today to carve out some times. I guess it's 7:30 in the morning in California. But thank you for joining us today at this event. I want to give you a few minutes to talk about your company and a little bit about the vaccines, what that's like. I know you said that you've had some experience. You're working with Dr. Fauci's team and a lot of this stuff. So we wanted to let our viewers hear from you and your thoughts on the pandemic and our pathway out of this. So I will give the audience to you, Mr. Andrews.
Thank you, John. Hello, everybody, and it is great to be back. I actually put behind me my Wofford Old Main photo just because it's a fond place, and Spartanburg was my home for the 4 years I was there, and my youngest son just graduated last spring as the pandemic kicked out from Wofford. So, and I'm back frequently, so I have a very amazing place in my heart for the Berg. So it's a pleasure to be here. You know, it was really sobering for me to hear Dr. Lombardozzi's comments. Our world of RNA and sort of the diagnostic world is a little bit removed from the front lines a little bit. So hearing those comments, I think allow us to make what I'm going to say today pale in comparison. But I thought what I would do today is take you guys through a little bit about the vaccine and why the vaccine is safe, and a little bit about how we actually were able to do this vaccine in such a short period of time. And so, as I was introduced, I spent the better part of my early career, 17 years in infectious disease, was on the front lines of the genomic world of HIV for many years, and then worked with Dr. Fauci and his team on HIV, but certainly on the first SARS-CoV-2 work, where we were the manufacturers of the kits that would identify the patients, the PCR technology. We own those patents, and so it's been sobering to look at SARS-CoV-2 in that same perspective, because it's a totally different virus. Although genetically it looks very, very similar, it's amazing what a few pieces of new gene code can do for the virus. So what I thought I'd do is just take a few minutes and give the audience. I've moved these slides back in. I had taken them out, but I wanted to reinforce what Dr. Lombardozzi had just mentioned, that this is an extremely contagious disease. If you look at COVID-19 at 2 to 2.5 times the infection, our normal flu, which is now influenza A, which was the swine flu H1N1 way back in the 2009, 10, 11, is still part of the vaccine for the flu. But you can see it's not near as infectious. And the original SARS-CoV-1 was even a little more infectious, but was not as virulent. So this is it's very important that you follow the guidelines that were mentioned earlier. I also want to put this slide up, and then we'll dive into the vaccines. The reality is, and this is a little bit old, this is from September, but these data come from epidemiology models that are used around the United States to help us to try to predict what's going to happen so that we can get ahead of it. And you'll see that the confirmed cases by PCR versus the estimated number of cases out there, 2 to 3 times the people have it and are walking around asymptomatic, which is really what makes this such a difficult disease to work through. The flu, when you get it, you kind of get it and you got it and you don't go out much. But the disparity between infection and symptoms between younger, healthier immune systems and the elderly is significant in this situation. And so a lot of us are walking around with this and don't even know we got it. And so that's why it's very important to follow the guidelines. Let me just start with, how do we understand, how do we test? There's been I get a lot of questions when I do lectures. What's the difference between, the PCR test and the antibody test? And so real quick, there's really 3 purposes for testing, right? There's the real-time PCR test that basically says, does this person have a SARS-CoV-2 infection? Because you're RT-PCR positive does not mean you have COVID. It means you have a positive infection. And the way to relate this from my world is, if you have HIV and you're HIV positive, that does not mean you have AIDS. AIDS is the disease, obviously, that comes from the virus and its pathogenicity. So when patients present to Dr. Lombardozzi, they're actually running a series of tests which are done within the hospital, typically, to look at what are the symptoms of this patient. And does this patient have COVID-19? And within COVID-19, what are the various diseases that are being caused? We've seen this as a thrombolytic disease, as it infects the epithelial layer of your capillary beds, as well as obviously a respiratory disease. And so we really have various forms of symptoms that have to be treated, which makes Dr. Lombardozzi's and his team's job really, really difficult. And then there's the antibody test, right? So, all right, if I've had it and I didn't really have symptoms, am I okay? Do I need to worry about being reinfected? And so, personal story of mine, my wife and I were back in Charleston in late September. She was headed for a vacation overseas. She went and got her nasal swab and she tested positive for the virus. She has lupus and is on chemotherapy. So obviously I was very concerned about her. The reality is she never got any symptoms. And so what we know now is, because we had her tested, she also has now the antibody. So still too early to tell how long those antibody titers will last, or will they seroconvert to what we call T-cell immunity in my world. And probably many of you have heard about T-cell immunity through the news, and it's still the jury's out on how strong and how long those T-cell immunities will last. So let me take you through the vaccine. What happens when this virus, you get the virus? And basically, this is a cartoon that shows that what happens is this virus is an RNA virus. So you have DNA, which is your blueprint for life. So you can think about a house being built. The master blueprint is DNA. But the construction drawings that the people use on the construction site, those are the actual drawings that matter, and that is your RNA. So your DNA codes through RNA, and RNA becomes sort of that building block or the code that gets used in the cell to produce various proteins. In this case, the virus takes over one of your major cell receptors, the ACE2, and it dumps its RNA into, it is an RNA virus, it dumps its RNA into the cell, and it takes over the transcription process to code for something to be built other than the normal protein that cell would be building. And when that happens, it creates a viral manufacturing center. And the reason I wanted to show this slide is because when we look at how traditional vaccines have been made, they typically have not used this mechanism to produce an inhibition of this replication. Typically, they just put an attenuated virus or a weakened part of the virus into a protein matrix and inject it, and then your body figures it out and creates immunity. What you know from this situation, and I'm really excited and proud of what happened in our industry, I haven't seen this level of cooperation between public health, between pharma and diagnostics since the early days of HTLV 1, 2, and 3, which, as you guys know, turned into HIV. And today, with really short period of time, relatively speaking, we got 1,574 active clinical trials. That is both for vaccines as well as for various therapeutics. The good thing, as Dr. Lombardozzi mentioned, is there's a number of therapies that they're able to use. None are prescriptive for every patient. So it has to be, it's precision medicine at its core today. But there's 577 unique therapies in trial, and there's 51 unique vaccines. And as we mentioned earlier, there are 2 vaccines pending FDA approval. There is a meeting on December the 10th for the Pfizer vaccine. I expect that will happen based on the work that I do with the task force. It looks like that's going to probably be approved on that day. And we know that those vaccine vials are already entering the supply chain. But they will, as was mentioned earlier, they will be determined by the state. Each state will determine how they're distributed. Right now, the recommendation, as Dr. Lombardozzi said, is really through first to the healthcare workers and then patients in long-term care facilities. But hopefully we'll get enough in the supply chain by January, February, March that we can also start working with folks that are may not be in nursing homes, but still at high risk. I wanted to show this slide real quickly and just talk about the difference between, I get asked a lot, Ronnie, how in the world could we create a vaccine that quick and it be safe? And what I always tell my colleagues is because things have changed significantly since the early days of our world of vaccinations, right? It took 197 years to isolate measles, 158 years to isolate polio, 11 years to isolate the mumps. But thanks to the Human Genome Project and the precipitous drop in cost and increase in turnaround time of our ability to do genetic sequencing, it now only took us 2 weeks to fully sequence the novel coronavirus. And so that process itself helps speed up our ability to look at an mRNA vaccine versus traditional vaccines. And so if you look at this slide, we have in common with the traditional world, we have to find out what we're looking at simulating for the immune system to respond to. And then we have to put that in the body and to protect you and your body create its own immunity to the disease. Traditional vaccines, though, have looked at inactive virus particles, and then they put those into a protein matrix, typically bovine or different types of albumin from various animals. Those have to be purified over and over and over again so that they don't cause a reaction. And then once all that happens, they're put into the trial process. And this has traditionally taken a very long time to get the inactivation of the virus, get the inactivation process down, and then obviously get the matrix it needs to go in down. The great thing about the mRNA vaccine is we really just take the DNA that we've understood now from the sequence, and we create mRNA, these construction drawings. We take those, and now we take them to the actual manufacturing site. So instead of putting these mRNA molecules into a protein matrix, they actually can go into something as simple as saline and Ringer's solution, as we formally call it in the medical world, and it will actually just go into and be injected into the arm. And therefore, what happens from there is that little piece of code is not the full virus code itself, but what it does is it creates small fragments of these SARS-CoV-2 proteins, and therefore, because of that, it actually simulates as if you had an actual virus. The traditional type of vaccine where you have the inactivated virus, now you don't have any of that, and typically we haven't seen a lot of the side effects that you normally would get with that. And you create these glycoproteins, and these glycoproteins actually elicit a very strong immune response. And so, the attributes of these vaccines are that it really uses your cell as the manufacturing center. It doesn't have to go through large-scale manufacturing at the pharmaceutical company with the large vats of protein matrix being purified. And here we use your body's cell as the manufacturing center for the proteins. And because of that, it's much safer, we believe, going forward, and it's going to give a much faster response. And the reality is that when we were sequencing the H1N1 back in 2009, the H1N1 actually took us almost 6 months to get the actual sequence down. And as I said earlier already, that we were able to sequence the SARS-CoV-2 genetic code within around 2 weeks. And now, as you probably know, we can iterate these things in 24 hours, and we can use what we call in our world an in silico design, which means we use a computerization model that allows us to predict different responses and different immune responses. And that allows us to allow both Pfizer and Moderna to expedite right to trials a concept that came out of the sequencing and thus the mRNA production. So I'm feeling very bullish as well about the vaccines, and I do think that we'll see these vaccines in the system very soon, and then hopefully our healthcare workers will obviously get those first doses and benefit from that as they are on the front lines. And obviously hearing Dr. Lombardozzi's comments were very sobering for me, because I don't get to spend time in front of patients like he does, and it's we tend to get a little removed. So hats off to you guys at the health center there, and appreciate all you do. And just know we're doing our part in the world of science and medicine here to try to create the right treatments for this horrible, horrible disease.
Well, thank you, Mr. Andrews. That was very interesting. We see a lot about the vaccines on the daily news, and so you mentioned there's 2 vaccines that are getting looked at from the FDA to be approval. There's 50 or so in trials. What would you expect out of those 50 or so? How many do you think will have approved in the next 3 months?
Yeah, I have connections to the task force, and there's a group called the Rockefeller Foundation that's kind of a 501c3 unbiased group working to try to help think through how these things get to market and how safe they're going to be and how we get them through the process faster. What I'm hearing right now is that we'll probably have these 2 vaccines now. We'll have another one probably late January, early February. And there'll probably by summer be 6 to 7 companies that will have cleared the FDA's safety protocols and will have will have vaccines for this virus. I think it will at least be next summer, and could be even fourth quarter next year before we have a full supply chain that's able to vaccinate anyone that wants a vaccine. But between now and I hope April, we'll certainly be able to take care of those at high risk. And those patients have the comorbidities that tend to lead to grave consequences. And then ultimately, those of us that have healthy immune systems, should we choose to take it, that'd be more like next late summer, probably early fall, going into next year's flu season. So,
and the preliminary data, I believe, has shown, at least what I've heard, is about a 95% effective rate. Put that in perspective. I mean, that sounds very good, but how does that compare to other vaccines that maybe even the seasonal flu vaccine? Is 94% unheard of? Is that just a total game changer? Would that eliminate this thing,
it won't eliminate it necessarily, but it will. As we get more and more people vaccinated, you'll get to a point where you'll be able to minimize the impact on the overall on society itself. Here's the H1N1 vaccine each year is pretty effective. The problem with the flu vaccine is we don't always know what strain of flu might come our way. And so you probably see that the flu vaccine's about in the low 80% effective against the flu each year versus, right now when you're seeing a specific immunity to a specific antigen, in this case, the SARS-CoV-2 virus. That's pretty significant response rate. And what we don't know from those data, to be honest, are how many of those patients were already immune compromised. And so their immune system was having trouble anyway. And now you give them the vaccine and the immune system doesn't complement the vaccine's work, and you don't get the titer levels of IgG and ultimately T cells that you need. So I would say those are really good data for this early in the phase of the release of these vaccines. That's incredible data for us, and I'm very hopeful. We use these vaccines in my world of oncology. We're working with mRNA vaccines for melanomas and for some pancreatic cancers, and they are extremely effective. They're very precise. The challenge is in cancer, it's usually a very, very complex set of genetic problems, and you can't really deal with just one issue like we can with the virus. But they have been effective. And they have been very safe. So I have high hopes that in the world of virology here, we'll see the same.
Yeah. One other question, I think you mentioned your involvement with the task force, and that's around testing. We've had a lot of news about testing. Are we at a point? I mean, how effective are the rapid testing? And I think the vision at one time was if you're going to go to work, you test your employee. 10 minutes later, do they get a test and they go to work? Are we at that point to where it can just do a 15-minute test at the office?
We're almost there. My challenge with those, and having lived now 30-something years in that world of testing in virology and now cancer, is this. The rapid test use a technology typically called isothermal PCR, which does not allow enough multiplication of that virus for you to actually always see it when it's there. So unfortunately, you get a false negative rate. So that's why you see these athletes testing every other day on these rapid tests, because over 2 to 3 day periods, statistically, you'll probably catch it. And so, I haven't seen the latest task force recommendations, but I know 2 weeks ago, we're in the cancer world, so we have to work. We've been working all through pandemic. We haven't been able to, let our folks shelter at home and work from home. And so because of that, we have a very strict protocol, and we do not do the rapid test right now because of the false negative and false positive rates. It just doesn't seem as effective. So what it is really good for is when somebody enters the ER there at Spartanburg Regional and they're symptomatic. Now they've got titers of the virus high enough, if there's a symptom, that if you test them and they're negative, but they have symptoms, that's probably not an infection. There's probably something else causing that. And so to triage patients, at least here in Southern Cal, I work with all the ERs out here and the ER docs. The triage process is really to use those rapid tests to get patients either into a COVID isolation ward or to treat the patient for something else. But I do believe a day will come where we'll be able to use the rapid test. I mean, the best test today is still not on the market, right? And that's a blood viral titer test with PCR, but we're not there yet. So we're using the nasal swab. And that's why I'm always trying to inform people, make sure everybody knows when you see on the news, there's been 100,000 cases. That doesn't mean there's been 100,000 people that are sick from the disease. That means there's 100,000 infections. And we can see the problem with these technologies, John, is you can see single viral copies now because the technology is so sensitive. So you could have virus in your nose that your body is clearing, and that test could still come up positive, which might make you asymptomatic. But so it's these, it is still a little of a dilemma. But I tell people it's better to get the RT-PCR test if you're thinking about traveling or you're asymptomatic. If you're symptomatic, then the rapid tests are fine. And then if you've had it, of course, you want to get the antibody test. You want to make sure your body's produced a solid, titer level of IgG antibodies so that you can be protected from future infections.
Right. And a final question I have for you, and maybe you don't know the answer to this question, but in your world that you live in, the vaccines, what's being done to prevent this type of thing in the future? What are we taking some? Are we learning how to potentially? I mean, it's been 100 years since we've had a pandemic to this effect.
Yeah.
Probably won't be 100 years before it's another one. Are we, as far as you know from the vaccine world, are we protecting ourselves for a future pandemic?
Well, the mRNA process that we just went through was extremely encouraging to prepare us for what might come next. There will be bad bugs, as we like to call them in our world. There'll be bad bugs for years to come. And, I am a firm believer that, that we as an industry are ready to jump on whatever comes next. But, there will always be that next. And I think we should just get used to it. We haven't had a pandemic, but I can be honest with you. Had we gotten the right, information early in September, October last year, and we could have gotten the sequence done in October, and we could have gotten prepared for this as a country, we would have been in much better shape. But which is why the international community, science community, has to continue to work together, and we have to be very careful about being critical of other countries and how they do their world, or they'll not tell us these things are going on. And if you think about HIV in the early days of HIV, the reason that HIV and we were able to get ahead of it quickly once we understood it is because the countries all work together. The pharma companies work with the government worked with diagnostic companies, and we had a really unprecedented sort of work together. And that's happening now with SARS-CoV-2. So hopefully this is the new wave of cooperation that'll keep us from having another pandemic.
Right. Mr. Andrews, thank you for your time. I think out of all what you said today, this morning, the story really is, even though this has been a very rapid process for the vaccine, the development, it's a safe vaccine. It's something that you would encourage from your perspective to get vaccinated, because that's the way to get out of this pandemic. And that's the story that I heard. So thank you for joining us this morning to give us this very insightful information, and best of luck to you and your team as y'all fight other viruses and diseases across this world. I mean, it's people like you and your company that public health depends on you, and we certainly appreciate that. And actually, the person that you guys have already given accolades to, and these were really Dr. Lombardozzi and the guys on the front line. I mean, we don't see what they see every day, and it's not as great. So I appreciate those comments, but really kudos and hats off to keep taking care of my Wofford College students. Yeah. I'm a long way away, and I can't look after them. So thank you guys at the hospital system there for taking good care of them, and I appreciate the time this morning. So. Yeah, go Terriers.
Go T-Dogs, right?
All right, that's right. So good. So thank you. Okay, that wraps up our second session, and we have one more. It starts in about 8 minutes, 11 o'clock. We're going to talk about the political landscape as we just finished up a national election a few weeks ago. That changes the dynamics of our political landscape, and so we'll have a very in-depth and fun conversation with two political parties to talk about what that means from their perspective, what that means for Spartanburg, what that means for the upstate business community. We have national transitions and what that might mean for our country. So encourage you to come back with us. All you have to do is just don't do a thing. Just get up and stretch, and we'll be right back with you at 11 o'clock with our final topic of Outlook Spartanburg. We'll see you soon.